Hello everyone and welcome to another Endgame episode with Coach B and masteryourchess.com. And in this video we're going to take a look at the positions that involve the struggle between a rook and two connected passed pawns. There are three main types of positions that involve this type of endgame. The positions where the kings play no part, the positions where both kings play a part, and the position where only the defending king plays a part. First we're going to take a look at the positions where the kings play no part in this battle. In this first position, if it's white to move, white will win. But if it's black to move, white will lose. So let's take a look at the correct play. With white to move here, after b6, if the two connected passed pawns have reached the 6th rank without being attacked, then black will not be able to stop one of those pawns from promoting. Here, if black tries to move rook to b1, white can play simply a7. After rook to a1, b7 can be played, rook takes a7, and then the other pawn queens. Coming back from the beginning, white can also play here pawn to a7 first. If black moves the rook to a1 trying to prevent it from promoting, well, the other pawn will march. And then after something like rook to a6, pawn to b7, black cannot stop the pawns from promoting again. If it's black to move, white will lose. Black's rook will be able to capture both of the pawns. What you want to do is always attack the pawn that is further advanced. So here the correct play is rook to a1, attacking the pawn on a6 because it's more advanced than the pawn on b5. After this, if white moves the pawn to b6, well, black will capture the pawn on a6. After b7, rook to b6, that pawn could promote, but it's going to be captured and black will win the game. Coming back after rook to a1, I do want to mention that it's no better for white to try to get the king into action. After king to g3, black doesn't even need to use his king. The rook alone can capture both of the pawns. He has to come with the rook to a5. After king to f4, black will capture the pawn on b5, and after black captures on b5, pawn to a7, rook to a5 will stop that pawn from promoting. Next, we're going to take a look at the positions where the rook is in front of the pawns instead of behind the pawns. Here, if it's white to move, white wins again, because after b6, the pawns reach the 6th rank without being attacked, and there's nothing that black can do to stop them. After rook to b8, pawn to a7, if the rook takes the pawn on b6, obviously the other pawn will queen. Coming back, if rook goes to a8, after b7, rook takes a7, the other pawn will promote as well, and white will win the game. If it's black to move, black will be able to stop those pawns from moving, but not capture them. Then it's a battle between the kings of who gets there first. If white gets there first, he's going to be able to get a draw, and if black gets there first, he's going to be able to win. So here, black will move the rook to a8, preventing those pawns from moving. If they try to move after like b6, for example, well, black here will be able to capture them as the pawns are on the 6th rank. However, they are being attacked. So here, after rook takes a6, pawn to b7, and rook to b6, that pawn is gone and black will win the game. Coming back after rook to a8, the correct play for white here is to get his king together with the pawns, as he's going to be able to reach there first. So after king to g4, king to g2, white will simply go with the pawns, and here he will be able to achieve a draw. After king to b7, the rook will have to move away. Pawn to a7, the king can take the pawn on b5, and after the a7 pawn promotes, black will simply capture and this game is drawn. In this next position, it's pretty much the same position, but now black's king is closer to the pawn, and here black will be able to win. After rook to a8, again, that stops the pawns from promoting. If those pawns try to march, well, black will simply be able to capture them. So coming back after rook to a8, if white tries to use the king to go towards the pawns, since black's king is able to take the opposition and it's closer to the pawns, white will not be able to defend his pawns. So this game will continue marching towards the pawn. Now black is attacking white's pawn. If that pawn marches, the rook alone can capture the pawns and black will win the game. So in conclusions, two connected passed pawns on the 6th rank or a pawn on the 7th rank with the other on the 5th rank without being attacked will win against the rook. If the pawns are further from promotion or the rook is attacking the more advanced pawn from the rear, he will be able to capture both of those pawns. If the rook is attacking the more advanced pawn from the front, it's only going to be able to stop those pawns from moving but not capture them, and the game will be decided between the battle of the kings depending on the king that is closer to the pawns. Alright, and I'd like to close with an exercise for you guys to see if you can apply what you've learned today. So in this example, it's black to move, And what I would like you to do is pause the video and think about what should black play here and what should the outcome of this game be. Alright, assuming that you've paused the video and thought about the position, let me go over it. Well, if you thought about rook to a8 here, this actually is not the correct move, due to the fact that, remember, if the rook is in front of the pawns, it's only going to stop those pawns from moving, and then it's between the kings to determine the outcome of the game. Well, if you look at this position, white's king is closer to the pawns, and here what's going to happen is that white will be able to achieve a draw. So coming back from the beginning, the correct play here is rook to f4 check, and after the king moves away, let's say king to g5, the rook will be able to move behind the further advanced pawn. And remember, if the rook attacks the further advanced pawn from behind, the rook will be able to capture both of the pawns without the king's help. So after something like king to f5, rook a5, king e6, rook takes b5, after a7, the rook simply comes behind the pawn and then will be able to capture it. And coming back after the rook takes the pawn, no better is king to d7, because after rook to a5, the rook will still be able to capture the pawn. Alright, thank you so much for watching this video, and stay tuned for the next lesson where we're going to take a look at both kings playing a part in this type of endgame. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website, masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.